Hello, everyone. Hello, Nikolina. You're on mute right now, which is okay. Hello. Hello.
Hey,
Nice to see you.
see you too.
Oh, there's people coming. I'm accepting them right now. We're going to wait for a couple of minutes before we get started, just to make sure that most of the people are in the meeting room.
No problem. How are you today?
Well, great. Super excited to listen to your explanation. I mean, I have already tested the product. I have understood a lot of very interesting stuff about my own health. And I hope as many people as possible will be able to do the same. I'm sure you have additional insights I haven't yet come to know about. So I'm all yours.
Good. Well, just remind me again, how long is the presentation? How long should I keep?
The what I have announced to the people who attend the webinar is that it's going to take 30 minutes of presentation.
Okay.
And then 30 minutes of question and answers, which eventually can take a little bit longer eventually if people have many questions.
Sounds good. I can go over a little bit, and I'll try and stop at the half mark then, at about 5 o'clock then.
Yes. Okay. I will have a very short presentation, just a couple of slides to explain to the people the context we are and what we're doing, and then the floor is going to be yours.
Sounds good. Let me know if my background's a bit noisy. I can try and put some headphones on.
No, everything seems okay. I can perfectly hear you, and the quality of the sound is satisfying.
Thanks. Are you in Paris?
I'm not in Paris. I lived in Paris until 2018, and then I decided to change the place where I live, and I went to the south of France. And so now it's been 6 years since I've been living in Aix-en-Provence. It's a small city close to Marseille,
Nice.
30 kilometers north. And yeah, it's much better for family life
I
and the
can
quality
imagine.
of life generally.
Yeah, that sounds.
Thanks for asking. Where are you based right now?
I'm currently in London, but yeah, unfortunately, my base is all over the place at the moment. So
I understand. I see you everywhere in every longevity event, which happen all around the world, which means that you travel a lot.
I do too much. Yeah, let's see. I
Yeah.
plan to stop in a few years, but let's see how it goes.
You need to accept some level of sacrifice, right, to be successful in your company and also move the whole longevity ecosystem further along.
Well, it's more education. Most communities, most people don't know much about glycans, and unless we go out there and educate about them, I don't think we're gonna change that anytime soon. So somebody has to sacrifice a little.
Yes. Okay. Thank you for doing so. Okay. Just to keep moving, I'm going to start a short presentation to explain to the people who attend the context, who we are and what we're doing. And it will leave some additional minutes for people who are a little bit late to attend the Zoom meeting. So I'm going to share my screen. Oh yeah, the PowerPoint. So here we go. So hello everyone, thanks for attending. So as I was saying, hello Varun, I see you, and there are some people I see for the first time. Thank you for attending. I hope you're going to find this very interesting, and it's going to happen on a regular basis, usually once per week with different keynote speakers. But because we are in the middle of the summer holidays, the next event is going to happen somewhere in the middle of August, which by exception is going to take longer. So let's get going. Ikare.ai. So this Ikare Longevity workshops are an initiatives coming from Ikare.ai, which is a company which helps you to live 100 years in good health. This is our purpose. This is what we aim for. And we use the recent breakthroughs of preventative medicine to make this a reality. We already have patients. We have a community of health coaches and doctors who are with us. And what we offer is let me get to the next. Okay, so not this one. Okay, so what we have is a personalized longevity journeys assisted by a medical doctor who has expertise in longevity and is going to do the scientific or medical part of the job, and also a health coach who is going to help you to consistently implement the recommended changes of lifestyle that your doctor has recommended. So this is what we're doing, but and this is a premium service, but at the same time, we have what we call the Ikare Longevity, which is the first online community of people who aim to live 100 years in good health or more. And we try to offer as many resources and information as possible for free for people who want to have this kind of biohacking, do-it-yourself attitude, which I believe is the case for the people who attend this workshop. So this is what we're doing, and this is how we're trying to help people live longer and healthier, and also push the longevity ecosystem forward. So this being said, I'm going to let Nikolina talk about GlycanAge, which is a disruptive way of measuring your biological age, and which I have used, and also by assessing the overall inflammation in your body. Of course, this is like very general presentation. Nikolina is going to explain this much more in detail. So please go ahead, Nikolina. The floor is yours, and you can share your screen. You should have the right to do so. Please tell me if you don't.
No problem. It's not allowing me. So maybe if you
Okay, try it. Can you try now?
Yep, I can share.
Okay, it's working. Cool.
Great. You can all see my screen now?
I do.
Okay. It's nice to meet everyone. I know it's summer, so taking time out for a Zoom call is a big ask, especially if we have good weather. I don't know if anyone's in the UK. We usually don't have good weather in the UK. So we are a commercial company now, but we started as a research institute, and our mission is really personalized and preventive healthcare. And we believe that this science of glycans that we've been developing for the last 3 decades is a way to get there. And of course, longevity is one big element of that. And maybe an introduction for me, I do this silly introduction of, how I got onto glycans, and it's, of course, because of my parents. So my parents met in a lab long time ago. This was 1991. It was actually my father's first job, or his first lab job. And he joined this neuroscience lab that was looking at glycans. They got these tools to look at glycans very early on. And that's where he met my mother. And and they published this paper on glycans and aging in the brain, which was the same year that I came to be. So I kind of was meant to stumble onto glycans, although glycans are a part of our biology that most of you don't know much about, because we just haven't reached this level of education and popularity as we have with genomics or even epigenetics. But I'll try to explain them simply, and if I complicate things, feel free to tell me that I'm going the wrong way. But in simple, glycobiology is the biology of sugars. But in this case, these are sugars that we manufactured to enable multi-cell life. So if we look at cell biology, all of our cells have this glycan coating around it. And majority of our molecules, or all the molecules we've had since we're multicellular, are actually glycoproteins and glycolipids. So the sugar part would develop together with the molecule. And they evolved to enable multi-cell communication, but also to add functionality on top of our molecules beyond our genetics and our epigenetics. So this is a paper published more than 10 years ago now, where we, at that time, speculated that glycans were the reason or the third revolution in evolution that enabled multicellular life, and now there is sufficient evidence to confirm it. So it's a way that we change our biology without needing to change our genes. So we don't need to produce another generation without needing to turn genes on and off, which is our epigenetics. We can change function of a molecule real time by adjusting glycans. And a lot of times, because they're sugars, our knowledge of sugars is mainly around dietary sugars. So people think that we measure a process called glycation, which is a random damage to your molecules by your diet. So you eat carbs, this spikes your level of glucose, and this damages your proteins. That's glycation. We don't measure glycation. That's a completely different process, which is not regulated or not related to your genes. Glycosylation is a sophisticated biological process we developed as a part of evolution, where we manufacture these complex sugars to add function to our proteins and our lipids. So it's very regulated, and our molecules don't function without the sugar part. And where they're interesting from a health measuring perspective is that you're looking at function of molecules versus a loss of function of an organ. So most of healthcare would focus on this loss of function of an organ. It will say your liver is not working or your pancreas is not working. And that's really a level of disease. You can identify which organ doesn't work, and then we manufacture drugs to give it back function, and you're on drug for the rest of your life. If we look at glycans or this molecular level, we can preempt that an organ would lose function very early on, and also be a whole cascade of different organs versus one thing. So that's the advantage. We get to preempt the problem instead of waiting for it to appear, where we can have the most impact of increasing your health span and your lifespan. And really, glycans would be in every process you can imagine, but I'll use these few to illustrate. For example, your blood groups are defined by glycans on blood cells. So this was our first discovery in personalized medicine, that you need to match the blood group to a patient for it to have a successful transfusion. All of the immune communication largely happens through glycans. So our immune system would communicate with the rest of the body and with different parts of the immune system. Cancer biology is really interesting from a glycan perspective, because cancer is a disease of our own cells want to be immortal, and how they've learned to disguise themselves from the immune system by adding these very healthy looking glycans to cancer cells so that it evades immune surveillance. And even basic processes like conception are mediated through glycans. So the reason we have conception is because sperm coats itself in these healthy looking glycans to evade the woman's immune system. So any biological process you can think of on a multi-cell level is mediated by glycans. And our focus or our research is predominantly around the immune system, the adaptive immune system and its aging. And if we look at aging, so we look at big cohorts of people, different age spans across different populations, we would see that these glycans on your adaptive immune system or antibodies, so immunoglobulins, would change in a way that you accumulate these pro-inflammatory glycans. So if you look at the curves on the graph, you have some structures going up, so you have more of them as you're older, and you lose some other glycan structures. So these are pro-inflammatory, and the ones going down are the anti-inflammatory ones. So you lose these, or the anti-inflammatory and pro-inflammatory functions of your immune system age and start to malfunction. And if you notice the blue and the red, there's a very prominent gender difference. So men would age in a very straight line, and with women you have this curve where in a way they look more favorable to men, at a certain age group, then as they get closer to perimenopause and menopause, they have this age acceleration, and then they catch up with men and move on the same line. So the main aging event for women is actually menopause and the loss of their ovaries, which is also why women develop disease a bit later to men, but they have more chronic conditions compared to men post-menopause. I think somebody put a question in the chat, so I'll quickly read it. Oh, it's in French, so you're going to have to translate this for me later. Okay, I'm going to keep going. Okay, so when we look at things that change with aging, there's this very nice paper that's just coming out in Nature Communications, where in between 300, 400 people, they measured everything you can measure on a molecular level, more than 6,000 traits. And 20 of them had a very strong association with age, and 9 out of these 20 were glycans. So glycans are very relevant to our inherent aging process. And this is actually one of the first systemic level aging clocks that was developed. Well, actually, the first theory of aging was telomere aging, or the shortening of telomeres. But then we learned that this is a good way to see aging of a single cell, which wasn't so good when we looked at aging on a systemic level, because you have trillions of cells. So you collect a bunch of cells, you measure their age. It doesn't necessarily tell you aging of a system, it just tells you aging of those cells. So if you want to measure aging on the level of a system, there are 2 clocks that do this quite well, and one is the epigenetic clock developed by Steve Horvath, and the other one is the glycan clock, which was developed in our institute by my father. And they're equally all old, and by coincidence, both of them were published on the 10th of December, 2013. So we celebrated their 10th anniversary last year. And Steve was very focused on aging. He was looking for aging. We were not looking for aging. We kind of stumbled now onto, as an accident, we were a glycobiology lab. And when we looked at these big groups of people, and we were actually the first in the world to look at glycans in thousands of people, and we developed the methods to do so, we stumbled onto aging as an accident. And actually, our institute looked at more human glycans than the rest of the world combined. So we looked at over 200,000 human glycans, and there's a review paper here showing all the published human glycans, and out of 191,000, our lab generated 160,000 of these. So we are pioneers in this space of looking at a human glycan at large scale. And apart from aging, or this like general level of decline, what's most interesting is that we would see these particular glycan signatures, so we call them glycosylation patterns, change 10 years prior to a clinical diagnosis or symptoms. So we can really preempt disease versus wait for a routine diagnosis. And although we're a commercial entity and we're a startup, majority of R&D is grant funded, and we've had over 40 million in grant funding over this 16 years period. So we are commercial, but we were actually more of a public entity up to a few years ago. And this is a review paper from last year where we looked at all of the different conditions that are related to what we measure in this systemic aging clock, and we identified over 72 diseases that have been studied so far. So this is only what's been studied. Most diseases haven't yet been studied from a glycan perspective. And we would see that different conditions have different glycan patterns. So you can identify, is somebody at risk of autoimmune disease or cardiovascular disease or diabetes or something else. And this is the wheel. So the blue is the autoimmune conditions, and then you have cardiometabolic, infectious disease, cancer, and a category of something we call non-diseases like smoking damage, non-alcoholic fatty liver, menopause, and so on. So it's a process that will connect to many different diseases through immune aging. And when we compare it to healthcare today, or when people get a diagnosis with the standard tools we have, which are symptoms and blood work that's looking for which organ doesn't function, we would see the glycan patterns change up to 10 years ahead of time. For example, in rheumatoid, we would see a certain glycan pattern change 9.8 years ahead of time with 92% accuracy. Or with hypertension, we would see a certain glycan pattern change 6.3 years ahead of time with 98% accuracy. So it's much earlier than what we detect disease today, and it's very specific. So AUC is the accuracy of a biomarker, and anything above 0.6 is has a potential to be a clinical marker or could get regulatory approval as a diagnostic. So all of these markers could be diagnostics eventually used in healthcare. And there's this, well, actually the reason we studied aging is when we would study disease, you couldn't understand disease without knowing age of a person. Because if you looked at a young person with Crohn's or some other diagnosis, he would have the same profile of glycans as a healthy older person without any diagnosed disease. So you can see the same process of inflammation in the young with conditions and the old without conditions. It's like a vicious loop of inflammation. It creates disease, but also it leads to accelerated aging. And glycans would regulate these inflammatory effects of your immune system. And if we look at aging on, everything that changes with aging, inflammation is one part of it, but all of these things are interconnected. And the good thing about the glycan clocks is that we actually know what drives the aging process. And in many other clocks, we're still looking for the mechanism driving aging. So majority of epigenetic clocks, we still need to do the scientific work to understand what process is actually driving it. While with glycans, the work has been done, showing that they would have pro-inflammatory, anti-inflammatory functions, which would then create this inflammaging process or this accumulation of damage throughout our life by challenges to our immune system. And if I say that we're a holy grail of biological age, you shouldn't believe me because it's very biased. But if other people say it, then I can highlight it. So this was a response to our first paper over 10 years ago, where they speculated that this might be the holy grail of measuring aging. And I think now we have more and more evidence to support it. But of course, aging is not one thing. So it's always going to be complex, and different people will age in different ways. And maybe as an analogy, I can tell a story of Steve Horvath. So this is a paper, one was published a few years ago and one is coming out now, where we compared epigenetic clocks and glycan clocks, or if you have acceleration in one of the clocks, and these clocks don't correlate. So you can have an accelerated GlycanAge and a decelerated epigenetic age, which was actually quite confusing. And both of these clocks would be good at predicting mortality or morbidity, or the time to when you develop disease and when you get ill. In some cases, glycans outperform, like we're better at predicting diabetes, and we're equally good as GlycanAge at predicting mortality, although we didn't model the clock of mortality. But when Steve would compare different epigenetic clocks, so he would compare a maximum lifespan clock, a clock to predict mortality, and a clock to predict disease, even these epigenetic clocks wouldn't correlate. So whatever governs your maximum lifespan is separate to what kills you along the way, or the clocks that predict mortality and morbidity. So that just tells us that aging is so complex, it's never going to be one thing, or you're never going to have one number to represent all of it. But you should look for the number that's the most accelerated for you. So if you have a high GlycanAge or high epigenetic age, that's the one you should focus on. That's the one that will potentially give you the most benefit if you improve it, instead of what people do right now. They look at the clock they like the most, or the one that gives them the youngest age, and then they say, oh, this is my biological age. There's never going to be one thing as a biological age. But what is important that whatever clock you choose to measure, it's been proven that it can show you on an individual level that it's relevant to your health span and lifespan. And now we have the evidence to support that. This is a study that's just coming out on, if you look at this accelerated aging from a glycan perspective in an individual. So here we tracked 600 twins over 30 years. And we had them, from young age to mortality. The ones that had accelerated GlycanAge had a significant increase in all-cause mortality, and also was quite predictive of certain diseases like dementia. So we know that on an individual level, if your clock is accelerated, this is meaningful for a health outcome. And if you improve it, this health outcome might change. And glycans are highly modifiable. So I'll show you how we can improve them. And I say that all bad news is good news, meaning if you have a high GlycanAge, this is very fixable. And it's actually an early warning at a time when you can still do a lot about it. For that to work on an individual level, we need this very good measurement without an error. And I think here we're probably one of the best tools out there because our measurement error is very small, or it's less than a year. So if you measure yourself continually, and this is somebody who measured throughout 10 years, or Mike Snyder, he's at Stanford, he tested himself 500 times within 10 years, or preserved the blood, and we analyzed that. And even in this very long time frame, the total amount of change was about 10%, and on individual time points it was 1 to 2%. So the error margin is very small. And then you see 2 events where he decelerated or lowered his age. One was here. This was a lifestyle intervention that was running. And then again, his age starts to go up. And then you have another event of deceleration, which is a diabetic drug. So for everybody, it'll be different interventions, but it shows that you can quite nicely track the aging process and intervene and change your curve. And there's many things you can do to decelerate the clock. A lot of them are lifestyle interventions. A couple of supplements gave us good results. And there's a number of drugs which also show quite promising results. The challenge is, even if we publish a paper and we say, hey, this intervention reduces GlycanAge on average by so many years, it doesn't mean that will have the same effect in individual, because in no study do you see everybody respond to a drug or everybody respond to a lifestyle intervention, because all of us have this whole accumulation of things that make us unique, from genomics to epigenetics to our metabolism, gender, environment. The advantage with glycans as a molecule to look at is that they integrate all of these different things. So when you're seeing somebody respond, you're seeing that he's responding by his genetic influences, epigenetic influences, environmental influences. So you can evaluate on yourself if something works or doesn't work for you. And I'll show you a few examples. So this is an individual journey in a woman. And in women, you have events which are pro-aging by nature. One of them is pregnancy. So you see an acceleration of about 10 years post-pregnancy, and then you see recovery post-breastfeeding, or about 2 years post-pregnancy. And in this case, she also has a risk of Hashimoto, or when she does her blood work, her thyroid would be in the range of Hashimoto, but she doesn't have symptoms of it. And when she would change her diet, her GlycanAge would reduce and her lab work would go back to normal. And one of the key levers for her is diet and fasting. So she fasted for 7 to 8 years, meaning only had dinner, because it was a way to maintain her weight. But actually, if you have an underactive thyroid, you should be eating more frequently because your metabolism is already slowed down. So when she reintroduces breakfast and has more frequent meals throughout the day, healthy meals, this would lower her age. And then, of course, when she's under stress or when work is stressful, that's when she would go back to fasting, or she would forget to eat throughout the day because for some reason she feels a bit better. But this would show negatively on her lab work. And you can see how lifestyle changes are really hard to maintain. You have good periods, then you have bad periods, and then you have good periods again. And this is a nice way to give you feedback on when you're doing well and when you're doing not so well. So ideally, we would find a drug that helps that, and I'll get to that later. But the important thing to remember is, although some things might work on a study level, meaning we're just about to publish a paper showing that fasting is good and it reduces GlycanAge in the cohort of people we followed, it doesn't apply to everyone. There will always be people who don't benefit or who have contraindications. And there is such a thing as too much of a good thing. And I think the best example of too much of a good thing is exercise levels. So we did this study a few years ago where people who exercise moderately, that's the blue cohort here, they're the youngest and they have the best GlycanAge. While people who are sedentary and overweight, they're a little bit older than what they should be. People who are just starting to exercise can often over-exercise. So these are people between 40 and 60 who never exercised before, who are just starting to introduce some exercise regimes. And you can see how a lot of them actually become pro-inflammatory as they're starting to adopt this. And then you have professional athletes. And professional athletes are equally inflamed as people who are sedentary and overweight. So you overdoing sports is just as bad as you being sedentary. And actually, if we look at women compared to men, women professional athletes are even more highly inflamed, or they have the highest scores we can find, which is probably due to a hormone difference. While if they exercise moderately, they're the youngest of all of the cohorts. So this balance, or what is the right level for me, is really important. And also that's very individual. For somebody, you can tolerate a high amount of, for example, strength training and not have inflammation. For somebody else, even a couple hours a week could make you chronically inflamed. So how about drugs? Because with drugs, you take a pill, you can take it for the rest of life, and hopefully it gives you the benefit. Well, the first suspect we had of a potential longevity drug was metformin. And we had one a pretty famous researcher, Tim Spector, he's at King's College, measure his GlycanAge for almost a decade now. And then he started metformin as a longevity drug. So he's not diabetic, but he believed that it could have an impact on longevity. So he trialed it as an experiment. And his age dropped by 11 years within 8 months. And since he's been on a drug, he's maintained that effect in his GlycanAge. Then we studied that in a research cohort where we had healthy people who were overweight, but they didn't have any diagnosis of diabetes or any other disease. And half of them went on placebo, the other half went on metformin. And we see that there was no effect of metformin on a cohort level. Only one person saw a significant effect of metformin. So that's maybe about 10% of healthy overweight people see benefit of metformin in terms of lowering inflammation. And then we studied diabetics on metformin and other diabetic drugs. And we see that just over 50% of people with diabetes would respond positively to metformin and have a reduction of systemic inflammation. So metformin, as in every other drug, doesn't work for everyone. In fact, we know the majority of modern drugs, in 90% of people, only work 30 to 50% of the time. So if you ever hear that there's this magic longevity drug that you should take, or pill, supplement, whatever, it's an absolute scam. There's never going to be something that works in everyone. It'll be something that works in the majority of people, so it's worth trying and see if it works on you. But unless you're tracking how it's working for you, you might just be causing yourself more harm than good. And metformin is probably the most innocent drug because it's been used for 60 years. It has minimal side effects, but it does have side effects. It lowers testosterone. It disturbs your gut. It hinders muscle gain during exercise. So unless you're in these small amount of people who benefit, it might not be the right thing for you to take. So how about other interventions? One very popular one that I think a lot of people are considering and trying is this young plasma transfusions. And we did this study with Steve Horvath. So we looked at both the epigenetic and the glycan clock. And they were taking young plasma from piglets and infusing into old rats. And they would see a 50% reduction, both in the glycan clock and the epigenetic clock. And the rats would live almost double the usual lifespan of a rat. Now, this is one study. This needs to be repeated a few times before the world believes it, but it's interesting. So we did something similar in humans. This was a study with this therapeutic plasma exchange. And we had different types of intervention and a sham spheresis or a placebo. And we see about a 3-year reduction within 6 months. So this is a long-term effect. And this is the long-term arm. So you see majority of people are reducing in biological age. And you see 2 people actually get older and then recover a little bit. So again, worked for majority of people in this cohort, but not for these 2 individuals. There are some interventions which might be more generic, meaning it could affect a good proportion of people. And in this case, one of them is menopause or the loss of estrogen and the loss of function of your ovaries. And we see that this shift in inflammation and inflammaging in women really happens in this transition period. So going from perimenopause to menopause. So before they lose their cycle, when estrogen just starts to decline. So estrogen is a very interesting target for longevity. And we did a nice placebo control trial with women who were temporarily suppressed estrogen. So it's flat, as if they were in menopause. And we see them age 9 years within 6 months. Or if you give them back estrogen, you see no aging effect, or they stay in this healthy baseline. And then this is the recovery phase. Then we looked at women in a menopause clinic who are just going on HRT, personalized, prescribed differently to their symptoms. And we see that the majority of the women are getting younger in the clinic. And then again, you had 2 women who went in the opposite direction. So HRT is potentially a very strong indication for a majority of women. And I think this is the only drug that we have hard evidence on now in terms of its effect on lifespan and health span. And this is a study that just came out with the UK Biobank, where they looked at of all of the commonly prescribed drugs. So they have 406 commonly prescribed drugs. 14 of them had an impact on increased lifespan, and 4 of these were estrogens. So I think now we have the hard evidence to say that estrogen is a longevity drug, and majority of these are prescribed to women. But of course, all of this needs to be prescribed in a personalized way. So how about men? How about men and estrogen? And men also lose their hormones throughout life. The only difference is for women, it's a dramatic effect, meaning at one point, their ovaries just stop working and stop producing hormones. And for men, it's a very gradual loss throughout life. So we had this study, placebo-controlled, where they would suppress testosterone temporarily in men, and they would give them back testosterone, or they would give them testosterone plus an aromatase inhibitor, which would block the conversion of testosterone to estrogen. And we see that there's only a positive effect of testosterone if you allow it to convert to estrogen. Meaning if there's no conversion to estrogen, it's pro-inflammatory, or it has a negative effect. So actually the beneficial effect of having a healthy level of testosterone is its effect on estrogen. And we see this in clinics. It's not really the level of testosterone that somebody has, it's the level of estrogen. So here you have a case study of a patient who's 73 years old, has been on testosterone for a long time. For some reason, he was given an aromatase inhibitor, meaning he had some symptoms of too high estrogen, which means he was probably overprescribed testosterone. And then when that was removed and his testosterone was lowered, that had a dramatic effect on his GlycanAge, which was maintained. So it's not the level of testosterone, it's the level of estrogen in men. And men, normal range of estrogen in men is up to 50. And actually men would have more estrogen than women post-menopause. So when women fully enter menopause and you measure the two, a man the same age would have more estrogen than a woman post-menopause. And then the key criteria to show that the biomarker will changing a biomarker will lead to a change of a health outcome is having a study where you change a biomarker and then it also reduces disease or reduces death. And this is the first study we have of that type in a very particular group of people. So this was done in Wistar Institute, which is in Philadelphia. They're a HIV biobank, and they have the largest HIV biobank in the world. And they had a cohort of individuals born as male who go onto estrogen and transition into women. And then this cohort was followed for 10 to 15 years. And they saw that there was a change of a health outcome, which was the loss of coronary plaque. And we see that the individuals who went on estrogen, their age reduced and they had a change in health outcome. So this is the first hard evidence that if we change a biomarker, we change a health outcome. And of course, majority of men do not want to go on estrogen, but I think showing the evidence that testosterone mediates estrogen, I don't think you need to go on estrogen. But there is a very interesting connection between glycans and cardiovascular disease. So we've studied cardiovascular disease for over 10 years now, and we see that these certain glycan signatures would shift up to 10 years before you have a heart attack or a stroke. And this is a recent study we did with Harvard, where they were looking at prevention of first and second events of heart attack or stroke. And we can predict those quite accurately, and we can also prevent them. So this is another study we did with different types of exercise, and the same signature that would predict a heart attack or stroke would positively respond to physical activity. So if you have this glycan signature and you go in an exercise regime, actually it didn't matter what type of exercise you did. So we would say, pick the type of training that you like and that you will continue. That would significantly change the glycan profile and would hopefully also lead to prevention of events. And we've gone down to basic biology level, where we looked at what is the mechanism that drives cardiovascular disease. And with hypertension, we see that these glycans that have a lot of these anti-inflammatory structures, they would protect you against hypertension. Well, if you don't have these sialylated glycans, this would be a risk factor to hypertension. So we've done an experiment in mice where we would hack these glycans, or we would give you a certain supplement, a precursor to create these anti-inflammatory glycans. And we see that if you have obese mice, so you feed them a high-fat diet and they become obese, if you also give them this precursor, you hack their glycans, you have obese mice, but they don't develop hypertension. So you can prevent the disease itself by changing the glycans. Now we're doing this in humans, so hopefully we also show it in humans. And then if somebody has a risk of this can be prevented with a simple supplement, but let's wait for the studies. So I'll end on a note of what is the potential of glycobiology? And I think the biggest potential we have is this prediction of disease very early on, and then also intervening and evaluating what works for the individual. So preventative and personalized healthcare. I think that's the number one technology potential we have with Glycans. And we're at the early stages of putting this into practice. At the moment, it's in the cash pay market. So it's something that healthcare won't pay for you right now. But we are doing the studies to bring this into the healthcare system. And although the healthcare system is very, very, very slow, hopefully in 5 to 10 years' time, this is something that actually your doctor will prescribe versus you have to pay for it out of pocket. And that's where I end. Actually, this was, I went a little bit over time.
Yeah, it was it was fascinating, Nikolina. Thank you very much. So now the next step is going to be the question and answers session. If anyone has questions, please go ahead. Otherwise, I have some on my own, but I will just give you guys priority. Does anyone have any questions? Okay, so yes, okay, Peter, please go ahead and don't forget to unmute your mic.
That was a really interesting presentation, Nikolina. Thank you. Can you give us any clues as to what the supplement is in your obese mice study?
It's not yet commercially available. It's like if you look at for this MANAC, you can find some supplements which are different. They have one different molecule. Don't buy that. That's not the same supplement. Right now, because it's not commercially produced, it's quite expensive. For the study, we're sourcing it from a manufacturer in New Zealand. And 1 gram is $5, and we need about 12 grams per person in the study. So it's about $60 per day. So I would wait for the results of that. And then once that is positive and it becomes commercially available, the price point will go down.
You think it opens the door to other tailored targetings through supplements to influence the glycan profile?
Absolutely. There's this field of congenital glycosylation disorders, meaning genetically you're predisposed to have the wrong glycans at the wrong site, binding to the wrong site. And some of these disorders can be fixed by supplements. And there's lots of, they're of course very rare disorders, but by giving a child a supplement for the rest of its life, it can have completely normal development. And a lot of it, they're cardiovascular or neural. So we will be able to change sugars and change our health outcomes eventually, but that research is very small, very underfunded. I would not recommend anybody to buy glycan supplements right now. If anything, there was a company who was actually scamming people 10 years ago by overclaiming. So I'll be very cautious about glycan supplements. But eventually there will be some, and we will use sugars to change outcomes.
Fascinating. Thank you.
Okay, Jason, please go ahead. And again, don't forget to unmute your mic.
Sure. Hey, Nikolina.
Hello.
Thanks for the presentation. I had a question. How closely do you think looking at these glycans are to measuring some form of insulin resistance, and how does that interplay kind of work?
So we have a number of human studies by which we would see a certain glycan profile change 7 years prior to insulin resistance or a clinical diagnosis. And that same profile would respond to weight loss and dietary changes. So this is a healthcare claim. So for us to give it to consumers, we need to go through regulation. Yes, there is some very good indications for that. And hopefully we'll be able to add those claims in the next year or two.
Okay, that makes sense. So so way in advance, basically you could determine this person's starting to develop something by the test. And would it be like a number, like a biological age? Hey, this person's normally 50, it says they're 65.
Interestingly, no, because that's not as related to the aging process. It's more damage. So we have you have these 3 families of glycans which change with the aging process very predictably. And they're, for example, more influenced by estrogen, which is then natural aging in women. But then you have these other two cohorts, which are more related to lifestyle and genetic factors. So for cardiovascular disease, it's very related to genetic factors. So you might have a normal aging process, but your risk factor is the cardio one, and that would show up separately to the clock. The diabetes one is more related to lifestyle, because it's completely preventable. Diabetes is completely preventable with lifestyle. So that would show separately. You might have a bit of a longevity genetic advantage, but you would develop diabetes at the same time if you have a poor diet. So we report on both. We report both on the aging clock and those particular risk factors. And risk factors are different to the general aging process. Like, for example, with smoking, that doesn't go into your aging clock. That's a behavioral risk factor, and that's reported separately. And it's not something that would change in everyone with aging. It would change in smokers.
Gotcha. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Okay, I have another question coming from Cedric, and I'm going to spell it for you. So on the subject of physical exercise, I've been doing the 7-minute workout for 6 years, accompanied by daily stretching. I wonder if that's enough to have an impact in relation to the studies you've shown us.
Well, you would need to test and see, because like I can tell you about a general study. There was a review of all the strength training studies that were published, and they were looking at what amount of strength training would change lifespan or mortality risk. And they determined that 90 minutes of strength training per week would reduce all-cause mortality 15 to 20%. But then above 3 hours of strength training per week would increase mortality by 10%. So this is on a level of a cohort, so the average individual, and there's no such thing as the average, because you could be the person who can do 5 hours of strength training and not have any effect on your mortality, or you could be the person that can do 1 hour of strength training and have an effect. So the problem is we need tools to measure what these things mean on an individual level. Otherwise, we can go by how we feel, but that can be, that's not always accurate.
Cedric is asking another question, unrelated to the previous topic, but related to the HRT for testosterone. So what do you think about taking testosterone for men, given, the studies that you've just outlined, where more testosterone may mean more mortality risk?
It's not the level of testosterone, it's the level of estrogen. So I would measure your estrogen and look for the healthy level in a man, which would be created through your testosterone. So you need to have a certain level of testosterone to have a healthy level of estrogen. And men as women, at one point, your natural production is not there anymore. And it's really hard to get there naturally. And I think at that point, testosterone is the way to go. It's complicated because there's so many things that affect your testosterone, and a lot of them are related to lifestyle, like stress, sleep, diet, being overweight. And it's kind of like taking Ozempic for weight loss. You fix the problem in a way that you covered up the symptoms of lifestyle, but if you fix the symptoms first, then you might not need it for a longer amount of time. And I would say everything you can delay it. But at one point, when you tried everything, you fix your lifestyle, your testosterone is still low, or your estrogen as a man is still low, I would say replacement is probably the best way to go.
Anyone has any other questions? Okay, so I have one. I have been really intrigued by the study where those transgender men who became women have seen decrease in their coronary plaque. And I have been taught and read everywhere that once calcium plaque accumulates in your arteries, there is no way to bring it down again. So your study kind of is opposed to what everyone is saying.
So I think it's prevention versus when it's already there. And that paper's, I think, published maybe in a few weeks. So I need to read through the whole thing versus just this, small part that we received. It could be that the plaque reduced. It could be that they had less plaque in this time frame that they were following them. They developed less plaque because they were on estrogen versus men who were not on estrogen. So it's prevention versus reversing that.
Yeah, I understand.
In general, I think estrogen's effect in men is very interesting, and you have that you have this intervention testing program that tested all the potential longevity compounds, and one of them is a type of estrogen that doesn't feminize. So it's alpha 17 estradiol versus the beta 17 estradiol that feminizes, and in mice it prolongs their lifespan, same as rapamycin. So it's kind of like giving men what women have without feminizing them. And that's I think that's a very interesting one to study in people. And yes, one of the main effects could be the cardio reduction, because the main thing both men and women die from is cardiovascular events. It's just the men die much earlier than women do.
Okay, another question I have is, I have personally taken the GlycanAge test, and it was very interesting. And I really tried to understand how I could use GlycanAge as a reliable tool for longevity, my longevity journey. You have presented that that Professor Snyder, he has tested himself like 500 times. And you see that on average, those there's a correlation between himself aging and at the same time the level of the GlycanAge going higher. But at the same time, you see some fluctuations. And this brings me to the conclusion that maybe you need many tests in order to have some sort of average. Because if you just do it once or twice, you might go on those spikes.
No. So difference between that study and the commercial version is we do analysis in a method called singleton, meaning we run the sample once. Commercially, we triplicate. So even that for that time frame, that noise is very minimal. It's about 1%. Apart from the periods that he sees a decline, then across those 10 years, 10%. It's kind of like what we can do with our longevity today from lifestyle drugs we can gain 15, 20 years extra of healthy life. So that's really what we're seeing, what the impact is. You don't need to do multiple measurements. It will generally change a year per year if you're not changing anything. But if you go on a drug, if you go on a lifestyle change, within a few months, you can see effect of that drug or lifestyle. So I don't know if I can ask you in this format, but have you tried, are you taking anything since the test? Have you tried any changes?
Yes, major lifestyle changes. Yeah, less stress, more sleep, improved diet. Yeah, significant ones. And I would most likely try do a new test right now. Hopefully, so just for the audience, I had an GlycanAge of 72 or 74. I'm 40. I was 42 at that time. I'm 43, and it sort of was very impactful to my mindset, and it showed me that I really had to change something in my life, because, as you say, you can predict diseases like 5 to 10 years ahead. And I saw that kind of outcome in my life if I didn't change anything. So this was really great for me. So now that I've changed so many things in my life, I would be very curious to take the test again and hopefully see that decrease in my GlycanAge. Now, another question I have is, how do you compare GlycanAge to the methylation, like the true diagnostic, for example, and the other like epigenetic clocks? Because the thing is that it's very complex to. So what was very interesting in your study is, and in your presentation, is that we understand that there's the only process that is possible right now is a trial and error process at the individual level. And things that work on average don't necessarily work for yourself or will work for somebody else. So that is very interesting. Now, when we understand this and we try to apply this kind of knowledge to ourselves, we come to this challenge to understand how do we measure our biological age, and if there's different clocks which give different answers, how are we going to find some sort of coherence in it?
Let me so let me go back to your story. I think we did an interview with you and I read it, and you discovered that you might I don't know if it was insulin resistance or your HbA1c was a bit high.
I have insulin resistance, yes.
Insulin resistance, okay.
Some level of mild, but still there.
So if you improve that with lifestyle, that should be reflected in the clock, because we know that one of the big predictors of if you have a high GlycanAge, one of the top disease predictions is actually diabetes. So that could be the sole reason why you have an accelerated GlycanAge. If that fixes with lifestyle, it would have an impact. But also, if you look at Mike Schneider, so his first deceleration was exercise, it was running.
Yes.
And as he developed diabetes, later on metformin didn't work for him.
Yeah.
That didn't work for him. It was another diabetic drug, I forget the name. But that other diabetic drug lower him down, straight down. So if lifestyle doesn't change your insulin resistance and you choose to go on a drug, I would look a couple months later, metformin, whatever it ends up being, if that has an impact. Because we know the diabetics drug in 50, like that study I showed with the diabetics, metformin, GLP-1, and another diabetic drug, 50% of people in each of this, more than 50 in each of these cohorts respond. So there could be an early drug intervention or, at the point of diagnosis that would knock down your GlycanAge. Comparing different clocks is difficult because all of them are measuring different things. And with many of them, we're still learning what these things are. And with epigenetic clocks, you have 15 different clocks in the market, and they're measuring 15 different things. I would focus on the clocks which are high for you. So if you measured all of them, whatever is high is your weak point, because both in the studies, both if we look at epigenetics and glycan clocks, you would have a good prediction of mortality or morbidity. So all of these are risk factors. But if your epigenetic age is good, that's not your risk factor. If your GlycanAge is bad, that's your risk factor. So that's the one to...
Yeah, absolutely. That rings a bell also, because the human body is a complex mechanism, and you also always have a limiting factor, and you need to look for that limiting factor. There's no use in optimizing something that is not your limiting factor, because this is not going to optimize your health span or lifespan or whatever. So yeah, this makes a total sense to think that look at what is higher, and that is your limiting factor, and work on that one, because that one is going to be the most impactful for you if you're able to lower it down. Yeah, makes total sense. Okay, so any other questions? We are out of time, so if there is one or two questions, fine, but otherwise we will have to wrap up. Okay, I guess there is no more questions. So thank you again very much, Nikolina. It was a pleasure, fascinating as always. The webinar is recorded. It's going to be processed for a couple of hours, and then I'm going to make it available for you, Nikolina, and for the rest of the audience. So thank you very much again, and see you during our next longevity workshop. Bye-bye, everyone.
Thank you,
Thank you, everyone, again. Bye-bye.